Right now, your hands might be resting on the covers, yet they still feel as if they are gripping something tightly, as if you are trying to hold the very edges of tomorrow together before it has even arrived. Maybe you feel a phantom tension in your fingers, a remnant of the day where you were constantly adjusting, pulling, and tucking in the loose ends of your life to ensure nothing would unravel. You came to this moment because the effort of keeping everything perfectly aligned has grown heavier than the life itself. Perhaps the room around you is quiet, the air cool against your skin, and the shadows of the tree branches outside are swaying with a slow, rhythmic grace. But inside your chest, there is a frantic, invisible loom that refuses to stop its clatter. You are trying to predict the pattern of the next few hours, the next few days, as if by constant mental rearranging, you could prevent a single thread from coming loose. It is deeply tiring to be the architect of your own peace, constantly building walls against the possibility of change. You are not broken for feeling this weight. You are not failing because your mind cannot find the off switch. What you are feeling is simply the exhaustion of trying to hold the wind still. Tonight, we will not force your mind to become empty or silent. We will not treat your thoughts as intruders that must be expelled. Instead, we are going to acknowledge that your desire to manage the future is a survival mechanism, a way you learn to find safety in a world that is always moving. But tonight, we will explore why the very tools you use to secure your life are the ones causing you to lose your rest. Consider this paradox. The mind does not become peaceful because you successfully micromanage every outcome. It becomes peaceful when you stop treating your internal narrative as a command from a superior. You have been carrying the weight of being the weaver, the loom, and the tapestry all at once, believing that if you stop pulling the threads, your entire sense of security will dissolve. But what if the tapestry of your life has a structure of its own, held together by deeper forces than your own anxious effort? Dear friend, you are safe enough to soften right now. You do not need to solve the knots of your life while the moon moves across the sky. There is a profound difference between caring for your path and trying to force the ground to remain perfectly smooth. When you try to control the trajectory of your days, you are essentially trying to grasp the silk of the fabric while it is still being spun. It slips, it tears, and it leaves you with nothing but the frustration of an empty palm. Take a slow, deep breath, and as you exhale, imagine the invisible shuttle you have been holding, the tool you use to try and bind your worries into a neat, predictable pattern, simply sliding out of your hand and onto the soft, cool floor of this room. You do not need to reach for it. You do not need to check if the pattern is holding. In this moment, nothing is required of you. There are no loose threads that demand your immediate attention. Your only task is to witness the texture of your own existence without trying to alter its weave. You might notice that as you attempt to let go of this mental weaving, a wave of discomfort arises. That is perfectly natural. It is the feeling of the unknown rushing back in to fill the space where your constant planning used to be. Do not be afraid of that space. That vast, open emptiness is not a threat. It is the very place where rest begins. For so long, you have identified with the weaver, believing that if the weaver stops, the work ends. But there is a part of you, a quiet, observing presence that exists apart from the work. This presence does not need to weave anything. It only needs to notice that the loom is here, the threads are here, and that the tapestry of your life is unfolding exactly as it must, without your desperate intervention. If it feels right, let your jaw relax. Let your shoulders descend an inch further into the softness of your bed. You have been carrying a heavy cloak of responsibility for your own happiness, thinking that if you ever stop monitoring your heart, you will lose your way. But the map is already under your feet. The threads are already being woven by the rhythm of your own natural living. You do not have to be the one who ensures the sun rises or that your heart continues its steady, rhythmic pulse. You have been doing so much for so long that you have forgotten how to simply inhabit the space of being. In a few moments, we will look at a story of a royal weaver who, like you, believed that his value lay entirely in the perfection of his output. But before we step into that quiet, shadowed workshop, simply notice the sensation of the air moving in and out of your lungs. This is a process that needs no oversight from you. Your body knows how to breathe. Your life knows how to unfold. You are allowed to be a passenger in your own story tonight, watching the colors shift and the patterns emerge, without having to adjust a single line. You have done nothing wrong by feeling this exhaustion. It is the natural price of trying to be the sole guardian of an ever-changing world. But tonight the guarding can cease. The looms are quiet. The silk is cool. You are just a guest in this room, resting in the architecture of your own quiet breath. Everything that needs to be taken care of will remain exactly as it is until the morning. You are not abandoning your life by resting. You are simply allowing the weaver to step away from the frame so that the tapestry can finally hang in the stillness, finding its own natural balance in the moonlight. You are safe here, in this unfolding, unmanaged, and beautiful dark. In a province far from the dust of busy roads, there lived a weaver named Kalen. His workshop was a narrow, dim room where the only sounds were the dry, rhythmic clicking of his wooden shuttle and the occasional sigh of the cedar beams settling under the weight of the night. Kalen was known throughout the valley for the exquisite tapestries he produced. They were masterpieces of order, where every single thread was aligned with a precision that bordered on obsession. If a single strand of silk veered even a hair's breadth to the left, he would unpick the entire section, his fingers raw and trembling, until he had forced the pattern back into his vision of perfection. Kalen believed that the beauty of his craft depended entirely on his vigilance. He felt that if he ever closed his eyes, if he ever allowed his hands to rest, the entire structure of the tapestry would succumb to the chaos of the world outside. He carried an ivory shuttle, smooth and cool to the touch, polished by decades of his own frantic movement. For Kalen, this shuttle was not just a tool, it was the anchor of his existence. He gripped it with a force that made the veins in his wrists stand out like knotted roots, convinced that if he held it tightly enough, he could stave off the inevitable fraying of time. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the jagged peaks of the mountains, casting long, mournful shadows across his loom, an old, partially blind master weaver arrived at his doorstep. The master was a man of few words, known only for the tapestries that seemed to move with the life of a mountain stream. He walked into Kalen's workshop, the scent of pine needles and damp earth clinging to his robes. He stood silently in the corner, watching Kalen work. Kalen was at his most restless. The light was failing, and he was struggling to keep the silk from tangling. He felt the familiar, hot panic rising in his chest, the fear that he was losing control, that the pattern was slipping through his fingers. He pulled the thread with a sharp, aggressive jerk, and a faint snapping sound echoed in the quiet room. Kalen froze. His face went pale. He had broken a thread, and in his eyes, this was a catastrophe. It was evidence of his failure to manage the world, a mark of his inadequacy. He bowed his head, his shoulders shaking with the weight of 1,000 such moments, and whispered to the air, "It is ruined. I have tried so hard to keep it straight, to make it hold, and it has broken anyway." The old master moved forward with slow, deliberate steps. He did not look at the tapestry. Instead, he looked at Kalen's hands. He reached out and gently placed his own weathered, calloused fingers over Kalen's white-knuckled grip on the ivory shuttle. The touch was not heavy, but it was firm, and it carried a stillness that seemed to draw the frantic energy right out of the room. "You have been treating the silk as if it were an enemy to be conquered," the master said, his voice as steady as a deep, resonant bell. "You believe that if you release your hold, the pattern will vanish. But look closely at what you have been doing. You are so busy correcting the thread that you have not felt the silk itself." The master took the ivory shuttle from Kalen's hand. For a moment, Kalen felt a sharp, hollow terror. Without the tool in his palm, he felt exposed, as if he might drift away into the shadows of his own workshop. But the master did not put the shuttle away. He held it up to the waning light, examining the intricate carvings on its surface, and then he set it down on the workbench. He didn't hide it, he simply placed it down, allowing it to exist in the space without being held. "There is a story," the master began, his voice blending with the soft rustle of the evening wind outside, "of a king who tasked a royal weaver with creating a tapestry that would never fade, never fray, and never lose its form. The weaver worked for 20 years, locked away in a chamber with no windows, terrified that the sun would touch the work and alter its colors. He grew frail, His eyes clouded, and his hands became stiff from the cold of the windowless room. He was so terrified of the passage of time that he created a work that was perfectly still but entirely dead. The master paused, his eyes shifting toward the broken thread in Kalen's loom. One day a hermit traveled to the palace, begging only for a place to sit and rest. He was brought to the weaver's chamber. The hermit looked at the cold, lifeless tapestry, and then at the shivering, exhausted man. He walked to the wall, pulled back the heavy velvet curtain that blocked the window, and threw the shutters wide open. The afternoon sunlight flooded the room, striking the tapestry. The colors did not fade, they bloomed. They danced. They shifted into shades of gold and amber that the weaver had never seen because he had refused to let the light in. Kalen listened, his breath catching in his throat. He had always feared the light, fearing it would reveal the unevenness of his stitches. The weaver cried out in despair. The master continued, believing that the sudden change would destroy everything he had labored to keep consistent. But the hermit pointed to the tapestry. "See," he whispered, "it is not breaking. It is merely living. The beauty you were trying to preserve was a cage. The beauty that is arriving now is a song." The weaver finally understood that by trying to stop the world from changing, he had simply stopped himself from being part of it. The master looked back at Kalen, his gaze kind and unblinking. "You have been holding this shuttle as if it were the only thing keeping the earth from spinning off into the void. But look at your hands now. They are still here. You are still breathing. The loom has not collapsed. The world has not unraveled because you stopped pulling for a single moment." Kalen looked down at his own palms. They were empty, marked by the faint indentations of the ivory shuttle, but they were finally resting. For the first time in as long as he could remember, he didn't feel the urge to reach out and grab the wood. The quiet in the room had changed. It no longer felt like a silence that needed to be filled with action. It felt like a space that was inviting him to simply inhabit it. The master reached into the sleeve of his robe and pulled out a small, dried seed, pressing it into Kalen's open palm. "Hold this," he suggested. "Don't grip it, just let it rest there. It does not need you to direct it to grow. It only needs the space to be exactly what it is. Your life is the same. It does not need your constant correction to be worthy. It only needs you to be present enough to witness it." In this moment, Kalen realized that his anxiety was not a sign of his dedication. It was a wall he had built between himself and the reality of his own existence. He had confused the fear of losing control with the act of living. He had spent his entire life trying to be the weaver, when all along he was merely the one witnessing the pattern as it was being woven by the currents of his own days. As the last of the light faded from the room, Kalen felt the heavy, suffocating pressure in his chest begin to dissolve. He did not need to fix the broken thread tonight. He did not need to return to the loom. The broken thread remained, a small, visible gap in the pattern, and for the first time, it didn't look like a disaster. It looked like a pause. It looked like a place where the air could move through. He closed his eyes, and the image of the shuttle, resting on the workbench, became the anchor for his mind. It was no longer a tool of control. It was a symbol of the permission he had finally given himself to set things down. He realized that the tapestry would continue to exist, and he would continue to be, even if he did nothing at all. He felt a profound sense of relief, a loosening of the tight internal knot that had governed his waking hours for so many years. He leaned back against the cool, rough wall of the workshop, feeling the gentle, rhythmic pulse of the night. And for the first time in his life, he let go of the thread. He did not reach for it. He did not worry about it. He simply let the night hold him, just as the loom held the fabric, without needing to know what would come next. This story is not suggesting that you stop caring about your life, or that you should abandon your efforts to live with integrity. It is not asking you to become cold, detached, or indifferent to the outcomes of your days. It is simply inviting you to notice a quiet, heavy truth about where your suffering truly originates. For so long you have lived under the assumption that if you just hold the threads of your life tightly enough, you will ensure safety, predict the future, and prevent the unraveling of your heart. You believed that the pain of the broken thread was the problem, that the mistake itself was the enemy. Buddhist wisdom suggests something quite different. It teaches us that the initial pain, the reality that threads sometimes break, that plans shift, that life changes in ways we did not intend is simply part of being human. It is the first wound, the inevitable touch of impermanence. But we often add a second, much deeper wound on top of it. This second wound is our resistance to that reality. It is the way our mind screams, "This should not be happening." Or if I had only tried harder, this would have stayed perfect. That internal argument, that desperate, frantic attempt to force the world to be different than it currently is, creates a friction that burns far hotter than the original difficulty. Think of Kalen in his dim, quiet workshop. His struggle was not the thread breaking that was just an event in the day, a small, neutral occurrence in the life of a weaver. His struggle was the belief that he was the only thing preventing disaster. He took a neutral event and draped it in the heavy, dark fabric of self-blame and terror. He convinced himself that if the pattern wasn't perfect, he wasn't enough. That is where the exhaustion lives, not in the work itself, but in the constant, silent narration that says you are always one mistake away from losing everything you have built. When we speak of attachment, we are not talking about the natural love or responsibility you feel for your life. We are talking about the way the mind turns a preference into a demand. When you demand that your future remains predictable, when you demand that your mistakes be erased, when you demand that your mind remains perpetually sharp and productive, you are essentially trying to grasp running water. The more force you use, the more exhausted your hands become. And the more the water slips through your fingers, you are left with nothing but the ache of your own grip. Impermanence is not a tragedy to be avoided. It is the very quality that allows for the beauty of the shift. In the story, Kalen feared the light because it showed him the unevenness of his work. He wanted a static, dead perfection. But the hermit showed him that the light allowed for colors he had never even imagined possible. Your life is not a static tapestry meant to be framed and hidden from the passage of time. It is a living, breathing process. The moments where you feel like you are unraveling, where you feel the sudden snap of a thread, are often the very moments where the light is finally allowed to reach the parts of you that have been kept in the dark for too long. We often believe that letting go is an act of defeat, a way of giving up on our values or our dreams. But look at the relief that washed over the weaver when he finally stopped gripping the ivory shuttle. Letting go does not mean you stop living. It means you stop treating your life like a hostage situation. It means you stop standing over your own heart with a set of impossible requirements. You are allowed to set down the tools of control because you were never the one holding the world together in the first place. That heavy, invisible weight you have been carrying, the responsibility for every outcome, the burden of every potential flaw can be laid down on the floor, right beside the shuttle, and left there while you rest. This is what mindfulness truly offers us. It is not a tool to make your mind blank or to suppress your anxieties. It is the capacity to sit in the workshop of your own mind and notice what is happening without immediately reaching out to force a change. You can see the broken thread. You can see the fear of the future. You can see the impulse to grab for control, and instead of following that impulse into a cycle of frantic, tiring effort, you can simply watch it. You can acknowledge, yes, that is a feeling of panic, or yes, that is a thought about tomorrow, and then continue to sit. You are the space in which these things happen, not the things themselves. Compassion, in this context, is the strength required to meet your own suffering without adding a layer of judgment to it. When you feel that tightening in your chest, that frantic need to rearrange the details of your existence, you can meet that feeling with a soft, steady presence instead of a harsh rebuke. You can say to yourself, "I am scared," and that is understandable. You don't have to convince yourself that everything is perfect, because that would be a lie. You only need to accept that you are currently experiencing the pain of trying to control the wind. That realization, in itself, is the beginning of the end of the struggle. You have spent so much energy trying to be the perfect architect of your own peace, believing that if you just work hard enough, if you just plan enough, you will finally reach a state of safety. But the safety you are looking for is not found in the final product. It is found in the way you inhabit the process. It is found in the ability to walk away from the loom when the light begins to fail. knowing that the tapestry will still be there in the morning, and that you will still be you, even if the pattern isn't quite what you expected. You do not need to solve the knots of your life tonight. You do not need to understand why the thread snapped or how you will fix it tomorrow. Those questions are for the morning. Tonight, your only purpose is to understand that the shuttle has been a burden, not a necessity. You have been walking through your life as if you were walking on thin ice, constantly checking for cracks, constantly trying to distribute your weight perfectly to avoid falling. But what if the ground is sturdier than you have dared to believe? What if you are allowed to walk with a natural, unforced step? The tension in your shoulders, the shallow rhythm of your breath, the way your mind keeps returning to the same few worries, these are all symptoms of a weaver who has forgotten that he is allowed to leave the workshop. You are not a machine meant to run until you break. You are a person, and your rest is as much a part of your life's work as your activity. When you rest, you are not failing to weave. You are allowing the colors to settle. You are allowing the thread to find its own tension. You are trusting that the tapestry of your existence has its own way of holding together, independent of your constant, anxious oversight. Notice how the room around you feels now that you have heard the story of the royal weaver. The walls are still there. The quiet is still there. But the pressure has shifted. You are no longer in the palace, afraid of the light, or in a safe space, where the light is soft, filtered through the dark, and inviting you to simply be. You don't have to do anything to earn this moment of ease. It is simply here, waiting for you to recognize that you are permitted to let the loom be still. As we prepare to move into a gentle practice, consider that the very thing you are fighting, the anxiety, the overthinking, the need to control, is just a misunderstanding of your own strength. You think your anxiety is your strength, the thing that keeps you safe, but it is actually the thing that keeps you trapped in the workshop, working in the dark. Tonight, we are going to explore the possibility of walking out into the courtyard, leaving the shuttle on the table, and breathing the cool, open air of the night. You are not abandoning yourself. You are finally, after so long, coming home to the one who is doing the living. And that person, that quiet, observing heart, is already perfectly at peace. Now, let us bring this insight into the quiet sanctuary of your own mind. There is no need to change your posture or adjust your breathing to meet some ideal standard. Simply allow yourself to be exactly as you are, resting in the space you have carved out for yourself tonight. We are not going to empty your mind, nor are we going to chase away the thoughts that have been weaving through your consciousness all day. Instead, we are going to invite them to sit with us like visitors in a workshop while we hold the ivory shuttle of our attention with a softer grip. If it feels right, notice the rhythm of your own breathing. You do not need to lengthen it or force a specific pace, just observe the rise and fall of your chest, as if you were watching the gentle movement of a loom. Each breath is an entry, and each breath is a release. You might feel the weight of your body settling deeper into the surface beneath you, a signal that your muscles are beginning to understand the invitation to pause. Your jaw, often held tight by the effort of managing the day, can unhinge just a fraction. Your shoulders, which carry the invisible burden of the future, can drift toward the surface of the bed, no longer tasked with holding up the world. Now, bring your attention to the thoughts that feel most urgent, the ones that tug at you with the need to be solved, fixed, or corrected. Perhaps it is a worry about a conversation, a plan for the coming week, or a flicker of regret about something already finished. Do not try to push these thoughts away, for to push is to grip, and we are learning to loosen our hold. Simply notice them. Give them a name if you like, perhaps the need to fix, or the fear of falling behind. Acknowledge them for what they are: patterns of energy, mental threads that have been caught in the machinery of your mind. Imagine, in the center of this quiet room, a large, sturdy wooden workbench, smooth and cool to the touch. Upon it rests the ivory shuttle, that symbol of your need to direct, to control, and to force the tapestry of your life into a specific shape. Whenever a thought arises that demands you fix it, or that warns you of disaster if you do not pay attention, imagine yourself gently, slowly, placing that thought into the shuttle. You are not discarding the thought, you are simply setting it down. You are taking it out of your internal machinery, and placing it on the workbench, where it can exist without your constant, frantic oversight. Watch as you release the shuttle. Observe the way your hand feels, now that it is no longer curled around the wood. Feel the sense of openness in your palm. If the thought returns, if the urge to pick the shuttle back up arises, know that this is not a failure. It is simply a habit of the mind, one that has kept you safe for a long time. You can greet it with compassion, saying to yourself, "I see you, but I do not need to act on you right now and then." With the same gentle patience, you can place that impulse too upon the workbench. There is no rush to finish this process. The workbench is large and it can hold every concern, every plan, and every worry you have brought with you into the night. You are not abandoning these things. You are simply creating a space where they can rest, and where you can rest alongside them. You are the weaver who has stepped away from the loom, realizing that the tapestry of your life does not unravel simply because the shuttle has been set aside. As you continue to breathe, notice the physical sensation of letting go. Does your heart feel lighter, even by a small degree? Does the space behind your eyes feel a little less crowded? This is the sensation of shifting from the role of the architect to the role of the witness. You are watching your life unfold, rather than constantly trying to steer it. You might notice that when you stop tugging at the threads, the pattern doesn't disappear, it remains, held together by the same forces that keep the stars in their courses and the tide moving toward the shore. It is not your anxiety that holds your life together. It is the natural, rhythmic flow of existence itself. If the mind begins to spin, if you feel the old, familiar pull of the need to manage everything, simply return to the feeling of your breath. Let the breath be the anchor that reminds you that you are here, in this room, in this moment, and that this moment does not require a single adjustment. You are safe enough to be still. You are safe enough to be unmanaged. Even if you don't feel entirely peaceful yet, even if the thoughts are still noisy or persistent, know that the act of noticing them, the act of choosing to set the shuttle down, is the most profound kind of wisdom. You don't need to believe that everything will be perfect tomorrow. You don't need to resolve the tension of your life. You only need to be present with the person who is resting right now. This is a practice of kindness toward yourself, a way of saying that you are worthy of rest even when your work is unfinished. Your value is not tied to the perfection of your output. It is inherent, quiet and unchanging, much like the wood of the loom itself. Stay here for a few more cycles of breath, feeling the air fill your lungs and then empty out, carrying away the residue of the day's frantic labor. You are like the weaver in the twilight, finally letting the tools of his trade rest in the cool, still air of the workshop. The work is done for now. The pattern is safe. Everything is as it is, and for tonight, that is enough. Feel your body becoming heavier, sinking into the support beneath you, trusting that the earth is strong enough to carry your weight, and that the night is soft enough to cradle your tired heart. You are not losing your way by letting go. You are finally finding the path that has been waiting for you all along. In a remote temple perched on the edge of a mist-covered cliff, there lived a monk named Jiro, who was tasked with the maintenance of a sprawling, intricate rock garden. This was no ordinary garden. It consisted of vast stretches of raked sand, patterned with delicate, swirling lines that were meant to represent the movement of the tides and the flow of the rivers of life. Jiro was legendary for his perfectionism. He spent his entire day with a heavy bamboo rake, ensuring that every groove in the sand was perfectly parallel, every swirl flawlessly circular, and every stray pebble removed from the path. He believed that his dedication to the garden was a form of service to the divine. If the garden was orderly, then his mind would remain orderly. If the garden was free of wind-blown debris, then his heart would remain free of worry. But the cliffside was a place of wild, unpredictable weather. Often, before he had even finished one section of the garden, a gust of wind from the valley would sweep across the sand, blurring his lines, scattering pine needles, and collapsing his carefully crafted patterns. Each time the wind blew, Jiro felt a surge of hot, sharp frustration. He would immediately drop to his knees and begin to rake the same section. Again, his movements frantic and strained. He viewed the wind not as a part of nature, but as an intruder, a force that was deliberately testing his ability to keep the world under his thumb. He was so busy fighting the elements that he never actually looked at the garden as a whole. He only saw the parts he had failed to control. One afternoon, a powerful storm rolled in from the sea. The wind howled through the temple rafters, and by the time the air cleared, the entire garden was a chaotic, unrecognizable mess. Sand was drifted in mounds against the rocks, and deep, jagged furrows had been torn through the center of the patterns. Jiro stood at the edge of the veranda. His bamboo rake gripped so tightly, his knuckles were white. He felt a deep, hollow exhaustion. He had spent 10 hours that day trying to fight the gusts, and in one final blast, all of his work had been undone. He felt defeated, humiliated, and deeply afraid that he was no longer fit to hold his position at the temple. The elderly abbot of the temple, a man who rarely left his quiet quarters, appeared on the veranda. He watched the devastation of the garden for a long time, the silence between them growing heavy with Jiro's unspoken resentment. The abbot stepped down into the sand, his wooden sandals making soft, muffled sounds. He knelt beside a mound of wind-blown sand and began not to rake, but to push the sand with his open palms, shaping the rubble into a new, flowing curve that mimicked the shape of the mountain itself. Jiro looked at him in confusion. "Abbot, you are destroying the order," he said, his voice trembling. "We must return the lines to the original pattern. We must erase the chaos so the garden can be pure again." The abbot did not look up. He moved with a slow, rhythmic grace, pushing the sand into shapes that honored the way the wind had left it, rather than fighting against it. "Jiro," he said softly, "you have been trying to trap the ocean in a bucket. You have been trying to rake the wind. Do you think the beauty of this place depends on your ability to force it to be still?" The abbot stood and handed the bamboo rake to Jiro. "Look at the wind's work," he suggested, gesturing to the sweeping, asymmetrical drifts of sand. "It is not a disaster, it is a change. It is nature itself, moving through the space. If you rake it back to your original rigid pattern, you are ignoring the message that the mountain has just left for you. You are choosing your own memory of the garden over the reality of the garden that exists right now." Jiro looked at the wreckage. He felt the familiar urge to fix it, the internal demand to prove his worth through the perfection of his labor. But as he looked at the abbot's gentle, open hands, he realized how much pain his own rigid grip had caused. He felt the weight of the bamboo rake, a tool that had become a weapon against his own peace. He took a breath, a real, deep, slow breath that reached into the hollow ache in his chest, and instead of plunging the rake into the sand to erase the new wild lines, he held it vertically, like a staff. He walked out into the middle of the garden, his heart hammering with the fear of letting go. He knelt down, but he did not begin to rake. He sat still in the sand, letting the cool, damp texture of it press against his skin. For the first time, he was not looking at the garden as a problem to be solved. He was looking at it as a field of presence. He realized that the sand had been moved, not to taunt him, but simply because the world was moving. With a slow, deliberate movement, Jiro began to rake, but he did not try to recreate the old pattern. He followed the new, curved lines created by the storm, gently deepening them, letting his own movements be guided by the way the earth had naturally shifted. He let the pine needles remain where the wind had placed them, seeing that they added a subtle, grounding texture to the composition that he never would have dared to include. He felt a profound shift in his nervous system. The frantic, high-pitched energy that had dominated his day began to settle into a deep, low hum. He was still working, still tending the garden, but the need for the garden to be a certain way had dissolved. He was working with the reality of the moment, not against it. He realized that the garden was not an object to be polished. It was a conversation between him, the elements, and the earth. As the sun began to set, casting a warm, liquid gold light across the temple grounds, Jiro reached the final section of the garden. He was tired, but it was a good, honest tiredness, the kind that comes from movement rather than struggle. He looked at the final pattern he had created. It was beautiful, not because it was perfect, but because it held the history of the storm and the response of his own heart. He leaned his bamboo rake against a nearby rock and walked back to the veranda. Leaving the garden exactly as it was, he did not check his work. He did not worry about the wind that might come in the night. He understood with a clarity that felt like a quiet light behind his eyes that he had been spending his life trying to rake the air. He had been so focused on the static, unmoving lines that he had missed the grace of the shifting sand. That night, for the first time in his years at the temple, Jiro did not wake up in a panic to check if the garden was still in order. He slept with a lightness he had never known, his mind no longer trying to curate the world in his dreams. He realized that the temple of his own peace was not built by the order he created, but by the acceptance of the change he could not control. And as the wind whistled through the mountain passes outside his window, he simply listened to it, acknowledging it as a part of the vast, unfolding whole, and then let it pass, just as he had learned to let his own worries pass into the quiet of the night. The relief Jiro felt as he stood on the veranda, finally leaving the garden to the whims of the wind, reveals something fundamental about the way we hold our own lives. We have been conditioned to believe that if we are not actively managing, correcting, and perfecting our internal experience, we are failing. We believe that if we stop raking the sand, the chaos will surely overwhelm us. But this is the root of the exhaustion you feel. You have been trying to solve your life as if it were a puzzle that must be completed before you are allowed to rest. Consider the mechanism of your own suffering. When something difficult happens, a challenging conversation, a sudden change in plans, a moment of deep self-doubt, this is the first pain. It is the raw, unadorned reality of existence. It is the wind blowing through the garden, moving the sand and creating a pattern you did not ask for. The first pain is inevitable because life is inherently moving, shifting, and unpredictable. But the second pain, the one that keeps you awake when the house is dark, is something entirely different. It is the layer of judgment, panic, and resistance that your mind pours over the first pain. You add the second pain when you tell yourself that the difficulty should not be there. You add it when you label the feeling of anxiety as a defect of your character, rather than a natural response to the complexity of the world. You add it when you replay the past, searching for the exact moment you could have prevented the outcome, or when you rehearse the future, trying to calculate a way to remain safe forever. This internal struggle, this constant, frantic effort to make the world different than it is the second wound. It is not the situation that is draining your energy. It is the friction of your resistance against it. You might wonder why the mind does this. It seems counterintuitive to cause ourselves such distress. But remember, the mind is a survival machine. It believes that if it can just think through every contingency, if it can just identify every potential flaw, it can shield you from harm. Your overthinking is not a sign of your brokenness, it is a misguided attempt at protection. It is a guard standing at the gate of your inner garden, so terrified of the storm that he refuses to let even a breeze pass through. He is so tired, so worn thin by his own vigilance, that he has forgotten the garden is not meant to be a fortress. When you try to fix yourself through shame, you are essentially trying to rake the sand by beating it with the rake. You are using the very tool of your suffering self-judgment to try and create order. But you cannot create peace through the energy of conflict. When you judge yourself for being anxious, you only create more anxiety. When you judge yourself for being tired, you only add fatigue to the fatigue. This is why you feel like you are chasing your own tail. You are attempting to resolve the restlessness of the mind by using the restlessness of the mind as your primary tool. The Buddhist insight here is not that you should stop having thoughts or feelings. It is that you should stop treating every thought as a command to act and every feeling as a truth that defines who you are. When a thought of fear arises, you don't have to turn it into an identity. You don't have to become the fear. You can simply observe it as a cloud passing over the garden. You can look at it and acknowledge, this is a thought about my inadequacy, or this is a feeling of concern for tomorrow. And then you can choose not to pick up the rake. You can choose not to invest your energy into the story that the thought is trying to tell you. Peace is not the state where the garden remains perfectly still. Peace is the state where you are no longer at war with the wind. It is a different relationship with the reality of your life. When the garden is disturbed, you no longer see it as a tragedy, you see it as a change. You no longer see your anxiety as a personal failing, you see it as a wave of energy passing through your system. Because you are not adding that second layer of resistance, the energy of the emotion does not get stuck. It moves, it flows, and it dissipates on its own, leaving your heart clear once more. You have turned your pain into an identity because it felt like the only way to make sense of your experience. If you are the person who is always anxious, then at least you have a name for what you are going through. But this identity is a cage. It locks you into a narrative that requires you to stay on guard, to keep raking, to keep managing. Tonight we are invited to set that identity down. You are not your anxiety. You are the space in which the anxiety occurs. You are not your past mistakes. You are the observer who has lived through them and is still here, still breathing, still capable of grace. The fear of uncertainty is perhaps the deepest layer of this cage. You cling to the hope that if you can just predict what is coming, you will be safe. But the future is never as rigid as your fears pretend. It is fluid, it is open, and it is precisely because it is uncertain that it holds the possibility for genuine joy, for new patterns, and for unexpected moments of beauty. Your desire for total control is actually a refusal to participate in the real life that is unfolding right in front of you. When you notice yourself rehearsing the future, gently ask yourself, am I trying to solve a problem that exists right now? Or am I trying to control a possibility that hasn't happened? Most often you will find that you are laboring over a story that exists only in your mind. You are raking sand that hasn't even been blown yet. By returning your attention to the simple, physical reality of your breath or the feeling of your body against the bed, you are stepping out of the loop of rehearsal and back into the sanctuary of the present. You are allowed to be unfinished. You are allowed to be uncertain. You are allowed to be a person who is still learning how to let go. There is no requirement for you to be a finished product by the time the sun rises. You are exactly where you need to be, which is in the middle of a process of transformation. The fact that you can recognize your own tendency to hold on, the fact that you can witness the second wound as it begins to form, this is evidence of your awakening. Compassion is the bridge that takes you from the second wound back to yourself. It is the ability to look at the tired, anxious, and worried parts of you and offer them the same grace you would offer a child who has been trying to hold up the sky. You don't tell the child they are a failure for being tired. You take the weight from them and let them rest. You can do the same for yourself. You can place your hand on your heart and acknowledge, this is difficult. I am tired of holding on, and it is okay to put it down for tonight. This is not giving up. This is wisdom. This is the recognition that your strength was never found in the intensity of your grip, but in the vulnerability of your open palms. As you lie here, feel the space around you. Notice how the room holds you, how the darkness does not ask anything of you, and how the silence is not a void but a container for your rest. You have spent your energy trying to construct a safety that can never exist in the way you imagined. The true safety is in the realization that you are not the one who needs to hold the garden together. The garden is held by the earth, by the light, and by the natural unfolding rhythm of the world itself. You are part of that whole, and you are finally, mercifully, invited to simply rest as a participant rather than a manager. This practice of setting down the shuttle, of choosing not to rake the wind, is not meant to be reserved for the quiet sanctuary of your bed. It is a way of living that can be brought into the most chaotic moments of your day. Think of the small, sharp instances when you feel that familiar itch to take control. The moment you check your phone for a message that hasn't arrived, the flash of irritation when a plan shifts, or the heavy weight of comparison that settles in your chest when you look at the curated lives of others. These are not failures of your character. They are simply invitations to see if you can hold the thread without gripping it. When you are waiting for a response, and the silence begins to feel like a judgment, notice the impulse to fill that space with frantic speculation. You might feel the need to rewrite the story, to analyze your own words, or to imagine the worst possible outcome. In those moments, pause. A single conscious breath before you react is a profound act of wisdom. It is the moment you choose not to let the second wound form. You are saying to yourself, I am uncomfortable, and that is a valid feeling. But I do not need to let this discomfort drive me to fix a future that hasn't happened yet. That breath is the ivory shuttle, resting on the table. Even the simple act of lying awake at night can be transformed. You do not have to fight the wakefulness. You do not have to berate yourself for being unable to drift off. When the thoughts come, the rehearsal of tomorrow's tasks, the replay of an awkward exchange, recognize them as you would recognize the sound of rain against the window. It is just the weather of your mind. You don't have to get up and try to change the weather. You can simply listen to it. You can acknowledge the thought, name it as planning or remembering, and then turn your attention back to the physical sensation of the air moving in your nostrils or the weight of your limbs. You are not failing at sleep. You are simply witnessing the movement of your own consciousness. Many of us carry the heavy, hidden burden of feeling behind in life, as if there is a timeline we were supposed to follow that we have somehow missed. We compare our internal reality, our doubts, our fears, our quiet failures to the polished external images of others. This is the ultimate form of raking the wind. You are comparing the chaotic, beautiful, unfinished tapestry of your own heart to a static image you have created of someone else. But life is not a race to a finish line. It is an unfolding process that happens at a different pace for everyone. When you feel that tightening in your chest, that sense of inadequacy, try to remember that your value is not a variable that changes based on your productivity or your status. It is as constant as the ground beneath your feet. You might also recognize the habit of smiling while feeling heavy inside, the performance of being okay so that others won't have to carry your weight. It is a heavy cloak to wear. But remember the weaver Kalen. He thought he had to maintain the appearance of perfection for the sake of the work. You are allowed to be tired. You are allowed to be in the middle of a process that isn't yet complete. You do not have to earn your rest by proving your strength first. The permission to be still is not something you have to win. It is a birthright you are finally learning to claim. Try, in small doses, to let go of the need for approval. When you find yourself shaping your words, your actions, or your appearance to secure the validation of another, stop and ask yourself, am I doing this to connect, or am I doing this to survive? If the answer is survival, if you feel you will lose your foundation if you don't receive that specific response, then you are gripping the shuttle again. You can gently place it down. You can allow yourself to be seen, even if it is imperfectly, even if it is quietly. The people who truly matter will love the tapestry as it is, with its loose threads and its uneven weave, because that is the reality of a human life. Do not be afraid of the guilt that may arise when you stop trying to fix everything. We have been conditioned to believe that if we aren't worrying, we aren't caring. But there is a massive difference between active, grounded care and the frantic, draining energy of anxiety. You can care about your work, your relationships, and your future without letting them consume your peace. You can do your best in the day, and then, when the sun sets, you can allow the workshop to be empty. You can trust that the progress you've made is enough, and that the rest will unfold in its own time. You are practicing this wisdom every time you choose not to follow a runaway thought. Every time you consciously release the tension in your jaw while standing in line, or choose to sit with a difficult emotion instead of distracting yourself from it. You are building a new internal architecture. You are moving away from the fortress and toward the garden. You are learning that your safety does not come from your vigilance, but from your ability to remain present and compassionate, even when the wind blows and the sand shifts. And what of those moments when you feel like you've completely lost your way? When the storm is too loud and you feel like you are back at the beginning, holding the rake with trembling hands. That is not the end. That is simply another opportunity to start the practice over. The teaching is not about reaching a state of permanent perfection. It is about knowing how to return to yourself when you have drifted. It is about the gentle, repetitive act of noticing your grip and choosing to let it soften. It is the practice of coming home, over and over again, to the quiet, observing heart that never left. As you navigate your days, look for these small openings, the pauses between thoughts, the space between breaths. The moment you realize you are holding your breath and decide to let it go. These are the portals to your inner temple. They are not grand or dramatic. They are simple, ordinary, and entirely available to you. You do not need to retreat to a mountain to find peace. You only need to return to the reality of the present moment, which is already quiet, already open, and already holding you in its steady, unmanaged embrace. Every time you decide to stop judging yourself for being human, you are healing the second wound. You are stopping the cycle of internal war. You are allowing the colors of your life to be what they are, without the need for constant, anxious adjustment. And in that allowing, you will find that the tapestry is far more beautiful than you could have ever imagined when you were busy trying to force it into a pattern of your own design. The patterns emerge, they shift, they grow, and they fade. And through it all, you remain not as a tired, frantic weaver, but as a person, finally living the life that has been waiting for you to notice it all along. The work of the weaver is finished for now. You have spent so many hours standing before the frame, hands aching from the tension of the thread, eyes weary from tracking the tiniest inconsistency in the weave. But look at your hands now, resting upon the cool, silent surface of the bed. They are empty, and in that emptiness, there is finally a space for the night to enter. You do not need to check the tapestry. You do not need to verify if the pattern holds its shape in the dark. The loom is still. The shuttle rests on the table, its purpose fulfilled, its task complete. Feel the way the air in this room has changed. It is no longer a space where you must be vigilant or productive. It is a sanctuary. A quiet corner of the world where you have been granted permission to step away from the labor of your own mind. The threads of your life, the worries, the plans, the memories, the hopes they will remain, woven into the fabric of your existence, but they do not require your constant, frantic touch. They are held by something larger, something steadier, something that does not require you to be the architect of every single movement. As you drift deeper into the stillness, let the image of the workshop fade into the soft velvet dark. Imagine the moonlight filtering through the high-arched windows, casting long, calm shadows across the floorboards. The cedar beams are silent. The silk is undisturbed. Everything you have been carrying, every knot you have been trying to untangle, is being held in this suspension, in this pause that the night provides. You are simply a traveler who has reached the end of a long, winding road, and the road does not ask you to continue walking until the morning light. Your breath is becoming a gentle, rhythmic tide, pulling you further away from the need to manage or control. With every slow, quiet exhalation, you are releasing a little more of that phantom grip, a little more of the weight of the future that you have been holding in your shoulders and your chest, the muscles of your face, the tightness around your eyes, the tension in your hands, all of it is dissolving into the softness of the mattress. You are becoming as fluid as the sand in the temple garden, as still as the tapestry hanging in the quiet of the night. There is nothing left to solve. There is no thread that must be tightened before you close your eyes. Even if there are gaps in your pattern, even if there are places where the weave seems uneven or thin, know that these are not defects. They are the honest marks of a life being lived. They are the places where the light enters, where the air moves, where the reality of your own humanity can breathe. You are not a machine meant to produce a flawless result. You are a living, changing, unfolding story, and the story is safe in the hands of the present. Let the sounds of the night, the rustle of the trees, the distant muffled hush of the world be the only music in your workshop. You are not required to do anything. You are not required to be anyone. You are not required to hold the loom together. The structure of your life is built on a foundation deeper than your own anxious effort, and that foundation is holding you perfectly, securely, right here, in this depth of rest. Your mind is like a quiet pool at the center of the temple, the surface smooth, the water clear, the depths undisturbed by the wind that passes far above. Feel the heavy, comfortable warmth spreading through your body, from the crown of your head to the soles of your feet. It is the warmth of finally being home. It is the warmth of realizing that you have been safe all along. Even when you were so busy trying to create safety, you have stepped out of the role of the guardian, out of the role of the creator of perfection, and back into the role of the guest. And as a guest, you are entitled to the rest that this house provides. You are entitled to the peace that this night offers, without any conditions, without any need to earn it through labor. Everything that belongs to tomorrow will wait for tomorrow. Your tasks, your responsibilities, the threads you are meant to pick up. When the sun rises, they are not going anywhere, and they do not need your mental presence tonight. You are free to let them drift into the periphery, to let them exist as mere possibilities rather than current demands. Your world is small, contained, and entirely peaceful. It consists of the breath in your lungs, the coolness of the sheets against your skin, and the quiet, steady rhythm of your own heart. As the last remnants of the day's restlessness fall away, recognize the gift of this silence. It is not an absence of meaning, it is the presence of your own true nature. Beneath all the layers of thought and all the habits of control, it is the weaver who is not defined by the tapestry. It is the gardener who is not defined by the sand. It is you in your most essential, quiet, and peaceful form, resting in the stillness of the night. Trust in the unfolding of the world. Trust in the cycle that turns the day into the night and the striving into sleep. You are part of that great, unhurried rhythm, and you are exactly where you are meant to be. The shuttle is set down. The rake is resting. The workshop is quiet, and the tapestry hangs in the moonlight, perfectly complete in its own beautiful, shifting, and unfinished way. What if the peace you have been searching for was never a destination you had to reach, but the simple, quiet awareness that was waiting for you the moment you decided to stop running?